I spent most of the month of July 2015 on holiday in Bohemia in the Czech Republic, and I shot almost 500 photographs. And I decided to put them into this little video instead of onto the usual photo sharing services on the internet because I thought it might be more fun to, at the same time, speak like this into the microphone and tell you a little bit about what my feelings were as I was exploring the place. Because I kept a kind of a journal at the same time as I shot these photographs. So the narration is going to have only vague relationship to the photos. It's not, I'm not going to be saying this is what this photo is. Rather, I'll be reading from the journal that I wrote during that time, at least from part of it. And at any rate, I hope that you enjoy it. This is a most exquisitely beautiful country, rolling with high hills, forests, green and golden fields, richly diverse in flowers and wildlife. I awaken each morning to the call of the rooster. I hear sheep and dogs no further away than a neighbor's house, and more kinds of birds than I know how to name. I think I can smell the cleanliness of the air here compared to the city air of Ottawa-Gatineau. I can see the high slope of one of the hills from where I sit, and it's easy to imagine that the land is calling me, inviting me to climb and discover what spectacles can be viewed from the summit. The hills are not mountains, but they are steep and rocky and varied. I'm told that draft horses are still used for logging around here because it's too steep to use tractors. So some of these early photographs, as you can see, were shot from an airplane, and that's because my host family did a very generous thing for me on my birthday. I was in the area for my birthday this year. For my birthday gift, they booked a tour flight. So that you saw a minute ago, maybe the photo of the plane that I was in, little tiny thing, and then some of the photos of the landscape from the air, and it's just glorious, isn't it? It's just glorious. Now the next day, the night of 5th July, some of the neighbors lit a fire in the village square. And the village square, by the way, is a small children's playground with a town bell and a crucifix and a maypole. They boiled some pork and they played guitar. I was invited and I brought some beer to share. Now, only one of these people made an effort to speak to me. The rest mostly left me alone. I think they could tell that I couldn't speak the local language. Although another person shared some of the pork and a few slices of melon. And it's a local holiday. It's in honor of an ancient Protestant martyr. And it's the townsfolk, 9 of them in all that day, none of them much older than myself, I think, basically celebrated not having to be at work that day. And it felt like I was witnessing a folklore event that might have been enacted in small farm settlements like this all over Czech for thousands of years, maybe. And my hostess, who speaks both languages, informed me that some of the songs were not necessarily about folkish songs about the harvest or about courting the ladies. They were actually about ribald topics like being drunk or like masturbating. So perhaps it's just as well that I don't have the language. But I can tell that there are lively and fun songs, the sort that might form the shared repertoire of a circle of friends who may have known each other for most of their lives. This is also the first time that I've heard a Slavic language spoken by people who are having a good time together. Normally, when I look back at my own history, when do I hear people speaking a Slavic language? It's usually in a Russian spy movie, and people are shouting at each other. But here, I'm listening to people singing in Czech, and it really made the poetry of the language come to life. And I think I appreciated that a lot better. Now this folk event, what it does is it reinforces their friendship. It gives them an event to look forward to while working, and a means of forgetting their work when the workday is done. And the songs might be unrepeatable, and the people themselves half drunk, and the whole event half comedy, really. Yet a tenacious thought keeps rising in my mind. This is what love looks like. This is what love looks like. On the 8th of July, this would have been my second, maybe third, second day alone in the house. One of the neighbors, who turned into one of my friends eventually in the area, one of the neighbors picked me up just after 8:30 in the morning to take me to Prague. She works as a real estate agent there, so she was going in anyway. And she dropped me in a small square in the old part of the city, on the the west bank of the river. And I've been looking forward to this for months. Prague was not destroyed in the bombing raids of World War II, so it's a preserve of what Europe looked like before the war, and all the way back to medieval times. And I've seen medieval precincts in European cities before. I've been to And I've been to France and to Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and obviously Ireland because I used to live there. So, but I've never seen it on this astonishing scale. And it's not just that everything is continuous and intact. It's also that everything is tall and cramped together and ornamented to the point of headache and flooded with people. All the sidewalks, all of them, have geometric mosaics made of cobblestones. And it's a sign of whimsy and joie de vivre, but it's also a sign of wealth and power. I find myself exploring side alleys so that I don't have to push through the crowds. I've reached the plaza in front of Prague Castle, but the castle facade is covered in scaffolding and safety sheeting, so there's not much to see. So I head down the hill again on a different route in hope of finding the Charles Bridge, but I take some side paths just to see what might be there to discover. This is something that I learned from video gaming, by the way. Always take the side paths. There's always something going on. Now there's stories and there's histories to everything, and there's almost always an English-speaking tour guide telling it to a group of people, but I prefer to make my own tour and to see the sights unmediated by the interpretation of the tour guides. I came across a Knights of Malta stronghold and a plaque in honor of Beethoven, my hero, and the Irish Embassy, and an alchemy museum which offers, and I quote, unforgettable Dark Ages environment. And I also saw some interesting looking toy shops and coffee houses and things, and I'm a little disappointed not to have found any bookstores yet. But oh well. It was not until I reached the foot of the Charles Bridge that I see something that really tells me part of the story of the city without needing any tour guide to explain it. The architecture here speaks of power and empire. There's a guard tower at the foot of the bridge, larger-than-life statues of kings, warriors, bishops, and the like, flanking the edge, so the bridge resembles a sacred procession way, where one meets at various stations the monuments in honor of the power wielders of the society that erected them. The bridge is also thronged with tourists, as well as hawkers who make their living from them, artists and souvenir sellers mostly. There are some beggars here too, leaning on their elbows and knees, holding out caps or paper cups to silently ask for charity. At the east foot of the bridge, there's another guard tower, and just beyond it is a cathedral facade and a magnificent statue of an ancient king, Charles IV, King of Bohemia, later of the Holy Roman Empire. Now I think I understood something about this city. It is a display stage for magnificence, for power, for the majesty of empire. It's a glorification of the partnership of those two medieval mainstays of authority, the churchman and the warlord. But even while it speaks of the magnificence of empire, so it also speaks of the fantasy of empire. At least that's what it does now. The statues, the spires of churches and guard towers, the ornament on every building facade are the remnants of a social world that doesn't exist, not anymore, and which is so badly understood by most people that, nowadays anyway, that it's easy to impose one's own imagination upon it. You can imagine that the warlords were always victorious and always just, that the bishops were always wise, that the working classes were industrious, artistic, and happy. Even the little museum of medieval torture, there is such a place. There's a little museum of medieval torture was, in a way, part of the fantasy. The tools once used to hurt people are shown in a cartoonish light. This changes the exercise of power into a spectator show, where the guilt or innocence of the tortured doesn't matter, and the justice or the injustice of the torturer isn't discussed. Sure, you read that it was all completely terrible, but it's in the past now, so we've all moved on. We're so much better now than we were back then. But isn't it interesting? Hence the fantasy, do you see? And actually that reminded me also about the Museum of Alchemy. It had a sandwich board outside of its door promising an authentic and unforgettable Dark Ages experience. There was a picture that looked like Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings. It's the assertion of the reality that caught my eye here. It reminded me of a comment by the philosopher Baudrillard about the reality of God. To paraphrase him, and so fit it into my context, if something is real, there will be no need to assert that it is real. But if something is unreal, there will be a desperate and urgent demand that it be asserted as real. We are sufficiently removed in time that we can look upon these monuments and see them as beautiful, and not see them as the instruments of a security state, which is what they originally were. The guard towers are checkpoints. The statues are propaganda bulletins. They are to be awed and feared in equal measure, but the 21st century tourist experiences them with neither. He looks upon them with wonder and with curiosity and with imaginal selfishness. The latter is proved by the way that she photographs everything as if to check off a box on a tally list of must-see sites. Right? He imagines the medieval society as he wishes it was, perhaps with a nod to how brutal it was, but mostly with an eye to how he might imagine himself living in it. A strong king, a wise bishop, a happy peasant. I stopped looking at the monuments on the bridge and I watched the tourists for a while. The overwhelming majority of them follow a very strict routine. They approach a certain monument, they remark to neighbors about how amazing it is, they photograph it, they photograph themselves or each other near it, they read an explanatory plaque or they listen to the tour guide, then they nod sagely to each other about the something or other of it all. And then they move quickly to the next one. And the whole routine takes about a minute and a half. I decided to investigate one of these statues for a full 5 minutes. The hawkers looked at me like they wondered what the hell I was doing. Yet, having said that, an obvious counter-argument appears. Well, obvious to me anyway. It is perhaps right that we experience the monuments of a bygone empire precisely as a living museum pieces, and precisely not as the instruments of the power of a present-day government. It is because the warrior king and the sage bishop no longer threaten anyone with imprisonment or torture or death for breaking criminal laws, nor threaten anyone with eternal suffering in the afterlife for breaking divine laws, that we are able to see it in the aesthetic light. Edmund Burke's definition of the sublime, I think it was Edmund Burke, I'll have to look it up later, his definition of the sublime as a class of the aesthetic could be usefully invoked here. The sublime, as he defined it, is the beauty of an awesome power, such as a thunderstorm or a flood or another natural phenomenon, but in a context where that awesome power poses no threat to the observer. You can stand safely back and absorb the sights and sounds of power, letting them inspire ecstasy instead of fear. So it is the same with the remnants of an ancient empire, such as the guard towers and the cathedrals and castles of the Holy Roman Empire, and the statues of the great and good which line the procession of the Charles Bridge here in Prague. The awesome power that they represented, the power of the high medieval security state, no longer threatens us. That power then can be enjoyed in the mode of the sublime, and not, thankfully, in the mode of fear and awe. Yet since that power is, or rather once was, a human force and not a natural phenomenon, we might be led to wonder whether we still have it in us to produce a medieval security state like the one whose remnants surround me here in Prague. And if the answer is that we do, then we should look upon the statue of the warrior king and the sage bishop and the other exemplars of power and say something like this: never again. Never again shall we kneel to the priest who claims to speak for the divine panopticon, the unblinking eye of God that observes and judges your every move. Now we shall be watched by video cameras with face recognition software and by massive dragnet searches of your every keystroke and mouse click on any electronic device, no matter how tenuously connected to the internet it may be. And we shall be judged by corporations for our brand loyalty and by policemen for our political quietism. Well, anyway, that was part of what I was thinking at the time. Across the bridge, I'm looking for the famous astronomical clock. That was a real highlight of the city, and I'm really looking forward to it. The third oldest astronomical clock in the world. And of those three, it's the only one that still works, showing not only the time of day, but also the zodiac position of the sun and moon and the phase of the moon. It's a 600-year-old work of mathematical genius. I've been looking forward to this for months. The streets are a bit of a labyrinth on the east side. I round the corner and find it unexpectedly. It's in profile to me, but it's unmistakable. It was also completely surrounded by a crowd of several hundred people. There's no way to see it right. I'm either standing at the foot of the tower that houses it, in which case I'm too close to get the full picture, or else I'm too far away to appreciate the genius of the mechanism and detail, or I'm swimming through the crowd where my view is obstructed by a dozen selfie sticks and the backs of tall people's heads. I find myself thinking more about the pickpockets than the clock. Curiously, the people in the best position to see it look directly at it only half the time. The other half the time, they look at it on the screens of their camera phones. Then they inspect the photos they took, and discards some of them and takes some more. And there's hawkers moving through the crowd selling postcards and fridge magnets. In fact, at one time, a group of Krishnas came through with the drums and the cymbals and things. The whole thing was quite the circus, really. All these astonishingly, diverse people gathering around this clock in order to have nothing to do with the clock. Now, the overall impression I had was that the clock was a wonderful thing, but it had to compete against simulacra of itself for the attention that it deserves. So I'm thinking of Baudrillard and his notion of the hyperreal, right? The hyperreal being, the simulation of something which people prefer to the real thing because it's cleaner or it's, better prepared or something like that. I'm also thinking of what some economists call opportunity costs, the competition with other spectators for a good viewing angle, and the effort to ignore the hawkers is how I pay for the right to enjoy a good view of this free spectacle. So I walk a few hundred yards to the north of the Old Town Square, and I reach the Jewish quarter, and there's a synagogue which, and nearby tour guide explains, is the oldest continuously used synagogue in Europe. I don't know if that's true. I'll take his word for it. It seems reasonable. I also hear that the golem still lies in the attic. That was a simulacrum, a mannequin basically, a statue that a Jewish rabbi managed to bring to life to protect his community. And it still lives in the attic of one of these synagogues here. It's rumored that it actually came back to life again during the Second World War and killed 2 SS officers who tried to break into the building. Just down the street, there's a minivan with a mural painted on the side to advertise a nearby Jewish restaurant. The mural features caricatures of Jewish people sitting around a table. The golem is the waiter. And 2 Jews stand around the van inviting passerbys to the restaurant or to a tour of the Jewish quarter. And they're dressed like some of the caricatures on the minivan. Round hats, round glasses, big black coats. The only thing that's missing is a 20-foot floodlit sign that says Jewish, right? But they speak excellent English. One of them has an American accent. He asks me, "Are you Jewish?" I said no. He says, "Do you want to be Jewish for a day?" I'm sure that he's only advertising his restaurant. But I wonder if I would offend him by saying no again, so I just said, not today. It's kind of bittersweet to see these 2 gentlemen here. Because on the one hand, it's gratifying to know that something resembling a Jewish community survived here following the Holocaust. But the reason Prague was not bombed by the Nazis, I have now been told, is because the government of Czech rounded up the Jews and handed them over. That was the price they paid to spare their city. Still, I find myself admiring the tenacity and the endurance of their community. So on the other hand, these 2 men are also, in a curious way, as unreal as the rest of the old city, living, heart-beating, air-breathing human props in an elaborate theatrical set. The city's residents are themselves another feature of the city museum, another feature of the history of the city made available for the viewing enjoyment of tourists. I listen to what some of the tourists say to them. Are there really Jews still living here? The answer, yes, there are lots of us. A woman says to her husband, "Gosh, there's something strange about them. Let's go back to the clock." Less than 100 yards away is another Jewish temple. This one has been converted into a museum. I can't find a sign telling whether it's free to enter or whether there's a ticket fee. It's an interesting building. It's about the size of a house in which I grew up, but it's designed with round turrets and blocky gables. Reminds me of a castle. The remark that the man behind me made to a tourist, that there are still Jews living in Prague, is still on my mind. It colors how I see the synagogue museum. I wonder about how the community made the decision to open one of their private community centers to the Gentile public. Was it an easy, quick decision? Was there an argument? Not sure. It also made me wonder, since Czech Republic is 80% atheist, or maybe I should put it this way, 80% not practicing of any religion, is this the destiny of all the religious monuments in this city? The Protestant and Catholic cathedrals, a mosque if there is one, or any other big religious monument in any other wealthy and prosperous Western country? Is it also their destiny to become museums? Anyway, from there, I moved along to a few other places. I had lunch. I bought a bottle of absinthe, as easily as I could buy a bottle of wine. That was kind of a novelty to me. I went to Wenceslas Square. Now, I was warned in advance to avoid it, that it's more like a shopping center than a tourist attraction. I decided to go and see it anyway, partly because it's on the way to a metro station, and partly because I want to be able to say I was there at the site of one of the most important events of the 20th century's history, the Prague Spring. I start at the northwest end, and my first impression is that my friends were right to warn me about it. It's a shopping mall. There's too many cars. There's too many big international retail chain stores. You know, it's not enough to make it consistently interesting compared to the rest of the city. The only one redeeming feature here is that I finally found a bookstore. And I can see at the other end, underneath the statue of the horse, a small crowd gathered under the statue, and I can hear a woman's voice shouting something into a PA system. And this is good, I say to myself. The square is still a gathering place for the people, still the site of grassroots political action. As I draw closer, I see that the crowd is completely ignoring the speaker. And then I see that the speaker is a religious fanatic. She's flanked with signs with Bible slogans, and two men carrying flags that say Jesus, one in English and the other in Czech, and both in big block capital letters. So that explains why the people are ignoring her. Right? Overt religiosity is in sharp decline in most Western countries. And it reminds me again of the Jewish Synagogue Museum. Are the churches destined to eventually become museums? And what about the people? Will those flags eventually hang in museums instead of flying in public squares? Perhaps that is precisely what the woman with the PA system and her small number of supporters are worried about. But I really enjoyed Prague, and I want to emphasize that I really did enjoy it, but I also found it quite overwhelming. I think that the time that I spent there on that one day was about as much time as I could have spent. In fact, at the end of my trip, I spent a fair bit of time standing over this bridge overlooking a railway yard, mainly because it was a wide open space, you know, where I could see into distances and I could see into the sky. And it felt just like a return to the 21st century, to stand for about 10 minutes overlooking, you know, the train yard. I spent the rest of the holiday in the Czech Republic, back in the village, about an hour's drive to the south of Prague. And after a couple of days of living in the house on my own, with my host family away, I began to feel the solitude like a weight. But the dogs worked hard to keep it off of me. From the moment I come downstairs each day, Heli, who is the larger of the two, takes my hand and leads me outside. She knows the basket of collars and leashes, leaving no doubt what she wants me to do, take her for a walk into the village or the fields outside. She likes to hop on my lap with her front paws and lick my face, something the family told me to discourage. It's kind of hard for me to get much work done when she's excited about taking me outside, and she whimpers sometimes when I tell her I have got riding work to do. The other dog, Kringle, who is a Virginia squirrel dog, much less exuberant, being a much older dog, but she too loves the company. About once or twice a day, she'll get up from her bed, come over to my side, and seeking some affection. The dogs are much more used to human company than I am, it seems, and they can't go without it for very long. There's also Leanne, the cat, similarly personable animal. She jumps up on my lap whenever she's in the house, even if I'm on the toilet, and she nuzzles every part of my neck and face, purring loudly. It's possible that she does this just because she wants me to feed her or open the door for her. Most of the time, she's outside doing whatever it is that cats do when there's no humans about. But her affection is welcome, nonetheless. The company of these animals isn't a substitute for the kind of human love that I was, craving the other day, but they make the house a lot less lonely. So the dogs and I went to a lookout tower, which I've half-jokingly referred to as the Philosopher's Research Station. Another reason why I've come here, by the way, is to have some solitude while I write my next book. And it's a walk through several fields to get there, and it takes maybe 20 minutes. Heli bounds ahead, and she pokes her nose into everything, and bounds ahead again. She chases field mice, and sometimes catches them and kills them. And Kringle just sort of plods along behind me on the leash. Heli does come to my side when I call her most of the time. A couple of days back, when Melinda was showing me the way to the tower, Heli found and chased a hare. I saw it bound across my path, running for its life. Melinda had to call Heli back and leash her to stop her from doing it again. Today I had her off-leash in the same field, but my mind's eye was looking out for the hare. Even so, I thought of what other life might dwell in these fields. I've seen mice and voles now, and bees on the flowers, and more kinds of birds. I've seen the owls. I have not seen the owls, but I have heard them, and I've found their pellets on the ground. I'm told that there are wild pigs in the forest and that they could be a small danger if I'm caught unawares, but Heli would probably chase it off. There's a different kind of wealth here than the wealth of the ancient city that I visited. It's the wealth of life and of forms of life, a wealth of natural sights and sounds, a wealth of fresh air and rain and earthly beauty. I love that we can walk freely through these fields. I love that these fields do not have clearly trodden paths. I love that the clean air smells just so clean. I love the reward of the wide view when I reach the destination. Heli is certainly right to insist that I should go outside and play with her more often, although of course I shall get less of the book written that way. If the imaginal space of Prague involves the fantasy of empire, the imaginal space of the Bohemian countryside is the fantasy of rustic dignity and frugal comfort, recalling Eamon de Valera's words. It's the fantasy of a bountiful and generous earth, of permanent good weather, simple pleasures, and easy work. I hike up this hillside with these two dogs at my side, and I imagine that I'm following some Irish ancestor of mine, strolling up a hill just like this one, in a landscape like this one, perhaps with two dogs of his own, and he goes about his day without hurry, and in full possession of himself and all the land that he can see from where he walks. I imagine that walking in this way, up this hill with these dogs, and with this vista of green hills and golden fields all around, it's a reenactment, a re-embodiment of my ancestral way of being in the world. But I cross a road and enter the next field, and I remember that this thought is, after all, a fantasy. Farm life and countryside life is certainly not easy. It's early mornings, late nights, fine-tuning, and heavy lifting. It's specialized technical knowledge and skills that I do not possess. It's putting one's life and livelihood in the hands of unpredictable events like the weather. It's animals who make demands on their keepers, as surely as those animals provide love or work, or for that matter, wool for the shearing, milk for drinking, flesh for eating. I do not have even the most basic prerequisite for membership in the local community, the ability to speak Czech. I grew up in a village, but I've lived in cities for most of my adult life, and I'm quickly becoming conscious of what an urban creature I have since become. I may have to return to my city eventually because, for better or worse, that's the world that I know. I'm a college professor. Colleges and universities are not set in farm fields, notwithstanding that I am a Guelph grad. Universities are features of that urban civilization which I have come here to contemplate from afar. They require an ecosystem of bookstores and publishers, equipment suppliers, government funding and foundation endowments, conference seasons, newspapers, broadcasters, internet cables. The students and teachers dwell in an overlapping ecosystem of landlords, bank loans, thrift stores, city buses, late-night pubs. The thought of returning to that world does not give me much happiness just at the moment. Well, if I am honest, if I did not return to the city, I would miss the bookstores and the pubs. Then I reach my destination. Kringle, being an elderly dog, has to be tied up at the base of the tower. He's not strong enough to climb the stairs. Heli, on the other hand, joyfully bounds up the stairs with me. She loves it. Its platform reaches above the canopy of surrounding spruces, and the sight of the world from here is beyond gorgeous. It makes me wish I could fly. Without intending it deliberately, I'm smiling. And for a moment I wonder if it might be perfectly morally correct to say of one who remains unmoved by such a sight that his spirit is bereft. Alas, the dogs are anxious and they won't let me stay here all day. Maybe when the host family returns from Croatia, I can leave the dogs with them and stay here all afternoon. Another reminder of my urban acculturation occurred to me this evening as I was cooking my dinner. In an urban environment, it's nearly impossible to know true silence. Here in this village, there are still ambient sounds in the air, but there's far fewer of them, and they're of a different quality. As I gather the pans and wooden spoons and other necessities for my meal, every little clack and bump I make sounds sharper, crisper, louder. The fine details are not being drowned out by the urban hum of cars and air conditioners that I've tuned myself to ignore. I stop what I'm doing for a moment and simply listen. I hear the sounds of the sheep in the neighbor's yard, some overhead birds, the creaking of the timbers in the wall, the grumbling in my own belly. And between these sounds, there's nothing. Nothing. So that's what nothing sounds like. Interesting. Well, that's what nothing sounds like during the day. At night, the little creaks in the walls and the slight movements in the bushes outside, and the nothing, makes me think of rodents, predators, and burglars. So when the host family was still here, all these little nothings didn't disturb me, since I trusted that the family would know the difference between an ignorable noise and something else. Now that I'm alone, I have to rely on the dogs for that, but as I'm the only human in the house, I'm the one who would have to do something about it. Has anyone written a phenomenology of sound? All the phenomenologists I can think of off the top of my head, going all the way back to Husserl and arguably to Aristotle, study the essences of things through sight. Yet surely sound communicates essences too. Surely sound speaks not only of the object that produces them, but also via the epoche of the mind that hears. Sound tells me of the presence of things that might be invisible because they're hidden behind walls or very far away, or maybe they're inside something, as when I knock on a wall to find the stud, or when an archaeologist uses ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden structures, or when a rail engineer bangs his hammer on the train wheel to listen for microfractures. After being alone in the house for 8 days, I find myself waking and sleeping with the sun. At home in Gatineau, my routine involves waking late in the morning, napping in the late afternoon, then remaining up and working until well past midnight. But here in this village in Bohemia, where there's no television, no games console, no high-speed internet, there is a basic service I can use for email, but not much more. I hear there's no reason to stay up so late. I have my tablet computer and some notebooks for writing, and many books for reading, so I'm not at a loss for something to do. But the need to stay up late isn't so strong anymore. I no longer feel as if I might be missing something. And as for getting up in the morning, the dogs make sure of it, either by whimpering and barking, or, as in one morning, by defecating on the carpet. In all this time, my mind was changing. My awareness of the passage of time, my awareness of ambient sounds, my eating habits, even my sexual fantasies, all changing. I woke up this morning feeling rather good about myself and my situation here. Near the end of this day, I spent a little bit of time, part of an afternoon, just sitting on a wooden chaise lounge and doing nothing. Normally I would spend it reading or writing or hiking, but this time I decided to just do nothing. Every once in a while I reminded myself of the story of Winnie the Pooh at Galleon's lap, and I make time to do nothing. But watch the bees gather the pollen from the little white flowers that grow in the grass. I watch Helly and Leanne the cat mock fight each other, and watch birds in the trees fly round each other, and count which flower beds could use a little more water. These sights, too, are what love looks like. I had been thinking about and searching the internet, well, to no avail, for a comment made by a Czech government minister to the effect that ecology is not a real science. The context being a hillside in the area not far from this village, which a Canadian mining company wants to tear up and pan for gold. Well, what if ecology is not a real science? What if it is the science, the queen of them all? Where zoology studies the animals, botany the plants, microbiology the cell and its organelles, where ecology studies the habitats in which all these organisms dwell together. Where economics studies the interactive habitats of cities, ecology studies the interactive habitats of all living organisms, including humanity. Where and how do we do things? How do we dwell? The logos of the ecos, right? The home. That is still a scientific question. Is it still possible to be mathematical and to deploy all of Popper's epistemic values of science? Of course it is. Admittedly, it's harder to make predictions as precisely as one may do in physics, and economics suffers the same embarrassing lack of predictive fertility, but no one in positions of power says it's not a science. Indeed, it's the only science they mention in propaganda, on all sides of the political compass. But in the science of ecology, it's always possible to observe a system in its natural state, make general statements about what is observed, and sometimes perturb the system to observe and mathematically quantify the results. This evening I'm going to the hacienda, which is a holiday home owned by two neighbors that I've got to like quite a bit. Their cottage was built during the war by two German soldiers who went AWOL. It overlooks the river, well, the reservoir really. Twice now I've been shown an engraving of what the river here looked like before the dam was built. It submerged a village, and divers sometimes swim around the ruins. Sometimes the steeple of the church is visible above the water. Now, my host at the hacienda is a couple of people. They're fun-loving, they're wisecracking, and they're delightful people. He asked me what I would tell my friends and students back home about Czech people. He said, "You can see we don't just eat mushrooms and swing from tree to tree." We had a marvelous little evening of drinking and talking about things and getting to know each other. And walking home from the hacienda was a surprisingly spiritual experience. It's about 2 kilometers. It was dark, windy, and overcast, so there was no moon. And so for a few moments, my world held only me and 2 dogs, and the deep black world around us, and the orangey-gray sky above. We were walking first through an impossibly black forest, then a wheat field, then the hedgerow-flanked road to the village, through a darkness and a windy wildness that seemed fresh from a mythic age. Only my borrowed flashlight lit the way, and it showed me only a dim pool of white in a sea of black and orangey-gray. I could have emerged at any time in history. I could have met anyone on the road and easily believed she was a mythical creature in disguise. Yet I felt at peace with this, for I could have believed that I myself could become a mythical creature too. Such perfect moments demand to be remembered, treasured, experienced with the fullness of one's sensory being, and perhaps deliberately sought out. For tonight was one of those great reminders that human life can be fragile, yet also romantic in its fragility. And I would like to thank the great Queen, if she's listening, for all this life that has such simple and yet dramatic, yet dreamatic ecstasies, so easily assembled and yet so rarely found. And now that I'm sitting on the guest room bed typing this memoir, I wonder what amazing things this modern electric light is banishing from my field of view. Now I'll say a few words of my impressions of the evening of the 18th of July, which was one of the last days that I was in the Czech Republic, and it was after my host family returned from their holiday. They came back a little bit earlier than originally planned, which meant, though, that I had about 5 days with the family there, and we could tour around together, and they very generously integrated me into the family a little bit. You know, when I needed my space to do my work, they afforded that to me, but when I wanted to come down and join them, they were always welcoming, and they always introduced me to their neighbors, too. So Melinda and 2 other neighbors who I had met, 2 people, a young couple who were going to be, well, at the time that I wrote this memoir, they were going to be married in about a week and a half. And they were building a completely off-the-grid log cabin with solar panels and producing some of their own food, and really lovely, beautiful place. I got to tour the work in progress a little bit. We went to a vinotheque in a nearby town, which is like a wine-selling place, I guess. They produce their own wine and they sell it there. What an interesting word, vinotheque. I love that. Anyway, they were hosting some kind of tasting event, and there would be live music, so we decided to go. The music was absolutely terrible, just painfully terrible, but the wine was excellent. I bought 2 bottles. It was also rather fun to talk to my new friends through Melinda's excellent translations. This couple are both ex-urbanites of a sort. They both have jobs in nearby cities, including in Prague, but they live in the trailer on their property here in the village, right next to their log house still under construction. So I asked them some philosophical questions related to the project I'm writing. Why live off the grid instead of in a city? Has moving to this village changed the way you think about things? What kind of future do they foresee for themselves and for others who wish to live as they do? If you had a chance to go back to the city, would you take it? I learned that one of them went to a prestigious Czech engineering school and that he enjoys building things and figuring out how things work, and this is part of the reason they're building their own house. He's also very environmentally conscious, and they plan to get the entire village off the grid using solar panels. And that my other friend, his partner, she works as a old book restorer. It's really, I think that's just kind of wonderful. In the evening, I took the dogs out for a walk because it seemed the dogs were anxious to go, and because I wanted to get out from under everyone's feet for a while. We went to a little rickety bench which overlooks the reservoir, which I have called my thinking place, even though I don't really get much thinking done there. Mostly I just sit and rest and try to keep the dogs close and enjoy the view. And on the way back, I spotted a deer in the wheat field. I'm proud of this because I almost never spot the deer back home, and I spotted this one before Heli did. I got 3 photographs of it, and then I raised my hands in a prayer to thank it. Alas, that is when it bounded away. Though this moment lasted perhaps only 2 minutes, it felt like a spiritual moment. I felt like I had been given a great gift. In my spiritual life, I don't have psychic or trance visions. I don't have spiritual experiences, as other people say that they do. I have moments like this encounter with the deer, where something of the inhuman world reveals itself to me and offers silent conversation about the smallness and yet the uniqueness of my life when measured against the immensity. Later that night, Melinda and her partner Peter and I went back to the off-the-grid property for a barbecue over the fire pit. And my new friends from the hacienda were there as well, and I played guitar for everyone, and I played the didgeridoo as well, because they had one there. Really fun night. And I got lots of gentle ribbing over my puzzlement about how to use the dry toilet. I imagined them talking about me after I'd left. So how was your Canadian visitor? Well, he came, he played guitar, he shit in my house, and oh my goodness, that was great fun. But even in that, I saw once again the enactment of the oldest human drama by which we human beings share friendship and love. Music and jokes and stories performed, food cooked over a fire in the center of a circle, shared out to all, a dog running about, a child asleep on a chair nearby, the round dark hills looming in the middle distances, curtains of clouds coming and going, the stars above them. The smell of the fire is still on my clothes. It is good.